Okay, so welcome to the fourth part of our series, Challenging Texts of the Torah. And there are a couple of new people in the class sitting in our chapel this evening. And just to kind of put us all back into context, we should have had this class last week, but by popular demand, it was postponed to tonight so that people could get ready for the holiday, and hopefully everybody is having a happy Passover. I'm talking to people online as well, watching on Ustream, and also recording it at the same time. So what we've been doing in the class, of course, for the past 3 weeks is to understand the Torah in this context, which is that through the eyes of how people within the conservative movement see the Torah, and that is a non-traditional approach, which is still a Jewish approach to the Torah, namely that the Torah is not necessarily given literally by God, handed literally by God to Moses at Mount Sinai, but in a variety of interpretations. There is some human involvement in the writing of the text of the Torah, whether Moses wrote down his experience right then on Mount Sinai, whether Moses and a committee of people right away wrote the Torah, or was the Torah written over a generation or two, or even were there different oral strands of stories that were then edited, all of which don't take away from the sanctity of the text at all, but certainly take away from the literal message of the text that God gave the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai. But the other, with human involvement, still understands that it's as if God is giving the Torah, because it's understood as a sacred text. It's understood as a reaction to some awesome experience, some sort of revelation, and that makes it into a divine text, something more sacred than any other work in literature. Shakespeare is important. Other books from other cultures that have survived the centuries and the millennia are important, but still not as sacred as the text of the Torah itself. But that being said, if we understand this human involvement in the text, then that allows us to understand the text in a different way, and when we come across sections in a text that could be challenging, with the air quotes like that, because challenging is a subjective term, then we have more tools available to us to understand the challenge and to answer the challenge. So we spoke about the first couple verses of chapter 1 of Genesis in terms of the creation of the universe and of this world. We talked about eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. We talked last time about the talking donkey of Balaam. And tonight I want to talk about this concept called Cherem, and how we can understand how the concept of Cherem is a challenging concept, and how we can make sense of it, if there is any way to make sense of it. So Cherem, when you hear the term Cherem, what comes to mind? Have you heard the term before, whether it's in Yiddish or in Hebrew? Usually Cherem in modern Hebrew means to put someone under a ban of excommunication. So it was used in the Middle Ages by the rabbis of Amsterdam against Baruch Spinoza, and that Spinoza's philosophy was seen by the rabbis of the time as antithetical to Judaism, and so therefore they placed Spinoza under this ban called a Cherem. Mordechai Kaplan who's a graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary and founded the Reconstructionist movement, was also put under a cherem by the Orthodox rabbis at the time, and if they could have, they would have burned his prayer book that he published as well. So yes, but cherem doesn't work too well in modern times because you have to have a unified Jewish community and it has to have some kind of effect. And if we as Jews can go from one community to another, and so to have a cherem over your head, well, it doesn't really have any effect anymore. But if you're within the ultra-Orthodox enclave, and that's your whole life is within an ultra-Orthodox circles, then sorry about that. I was distracted. The screen went blank, and I brought it back up, and then I had to start broadcasting again. So if you're within an ultra-Orthodox community and then you're put under cherem there, then that would have effect because that's your whole life within the confines of that particular community. So cherem doesn't have that effect as it did back in the Middle Ages and before.
So what you have to excuse me, but I saw the Bible this weekend, the movie.
Yes.
While I was doing my taxes.
Yeah. Okay.
And I know it's the movie depiction.
Yes.
But it looked like the high priests were in cahoots with the Romans against Jesus, so was he put in the cherem?
Okay, so Saul is asking about the movie, the Bible. What channel is that on? Is that PBS or is that History?
AMC.
Oh, AMC. Okay, so that's about the Christian Bible and the story of Jesus. And, okay, and that he's asking about the rabbis, or was it the priests? The high priest being in cahoots with the Romans. Right. So the text of the Christian Bible is even more of a question about the authority of it and the authorship of it than the Jewish Bible. And since I'm not Christian, I can't answer that. Yes, right. I knew a little bit about it based on the Jewish aspects of the Christian Bible, but the high priests, could the high priests have been in cahoots with the Romans? They could have, because at that time the high priest was designated by the Romans to be the high priest. So it's an appointee of the Romans. So yes, the high priests then, and the priests in general, would have done what the Romans would have wanted to do. But could the Jews have actually killed Jesus? They did not have the authority to do that. Only the Romans had the authority to do that. And whether that, as the Gospels depict it, did that actually happen? We don't know. Scholars think that the earliest of the Gospels was written at least 50 years after Jesus was crucified. So already you're talking about not an eyewitness account, and then coming through the eyes of a Christian perspective, or at least a follower of Jesus perspective. So you question then the bias within the text. So again, as a non-Christian, we can face the challenges of the Christian Bible and approach it in that way. How a Christian would answer that question, a Protestant versus a Catholic versus an Orthodox, etc. You'd have a variety of answers to that question. Adriana.
Is cherem a rabbinical concept or?
So back to the word cherem. Adriana is asking, is cherem a rabbinic concept or what? It's a rabbinic concept, and we're going to get to that in a moment. And what I just explained about excommunication is not what the Torah says cherem is. It's something a little bit different and worse than just excommunicating. Ruth. Oh, I thought you had your hand up before. Sorry, Julian.
So, in practice, are you going to Are we going to go into Cherem further, or should I wait?
Yes, we are. I want to look at the text, and so let's do that. So the text I wanted to look at is Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 16 to 18, which says, I'm starting with verse 15. Thus you shall deal with all towns that lie very far from you, towns that do not belong to nations hereabout. The book of Deuteronomy is Moses speaking to the people as they are about to enter the land of Israel. They are on the eastern side of the Jordan River, and Moses is summarizing for them everything that happened before. And in reiterating the law, there are some differences in the presentation and also in some of the reasons to observe some of the laws. So what we have here is when Moses describing what will happen when they enter the land, how they're supposed to treat the indigenous population. In the towns of the latter peoples, however, which the Lord your God is giving you as a heritage, you shall not let a soul remain alive. Which sounds awkward in the English. So what it is referring to in context is the towns within the land of Israel. You're not supposed to let anyone stay alive as you approach the towns in the land of Israel as you're about to settle the land. 17, no, you must proscribe them. That is how the JPS translation has the word ki hacharem tacharimu. You must proscribe them. The Hittites and the Amorites, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the Hivites and the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. What that means is that you are supposed to annihilate them. You're not supposed to excommunicate them, because that's what we just said. Cherem means in modern times is excommunication. No, it is proscription. So the Nachum Sarna in the commentary in the Eitz Chaim says, Hacharem tacharimu, as doom to destruction. Okay, that would be another way to translate that. Why are you supposed to proscribe these peoples who live in the land of Israel? Verse 18, lest they lead you into doing all the abhorrent things that they have done for their gods, and you stand guilty before the Lord your God. Okay? So, Cherem for the Torah, which is mainly, this is the main example of it here, is to totally annihilate these peoples. The Amorites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Okay? All those people who live in the land of Israel are supposed to be destroyed utterly. Why? Because they are pagan. They are idolaters. Okay? So, the question is, what's the problem with that?
I don't like it.
You don't like it. Okay, right. I would think that a modern reader wouldn't like that. Okay? And that we can understand that however we understand the giving of the Torah, whether God is actually speaking this Torah or Moses and the people are understanding the Torah as a reaction or a response to some event that happened on Mount Sinai, we can understand that the response to that would be utter devotion to God. Okay, and that makes sense. And we can understand that the response would be the development of Israelite religion as we know it, as set down here. And we could even understand that this particular response, as it develops into Israelite religion, would be in contrast to everything that is around the people at the time. And that the people would be devoted to God through Israelite expression and would be averse to anything else, any other expression of religion in whatever way, whether it's idolatry or some other god or gods, etc. Okay, but would it be necessary for God or even people to respond to the revelation of God to say, well, we have to annihilate these other people in order to protect us and to protect monotheism? That's the challenge, I think, that we face when we as moderns read this text. Okay, because modern people have a sense of live and let live, right? Or even more than that, that I have a right to my belief, and you have a right to your belief, and that is, I respect you, you respect me. That is ideally what modern people, modern Western people are supposed to believe. That's not always the case, but that is a modern sensibility what it is. So with modern eyes, we read this text, and then that tells us, told the people at the time, 3,000 years ago, that as you're about to enter the land of Israel, you're supposed to annihilate the indigenous population. That would be a challenge. What further compounds the challenge is that I said that this is verse 15 in chapter 20. Verse 10 in chapter 20 says, when you approach a town to attack it, you shall offer it to terms of peace. So how does that, that's 5 sentences before this one, that when you are about to, when you enter the land, you are supposed to annihilate the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. But 5 sentences before, when you approach a town to attack it, you shall offer it terms of peace. So that compounds the challenge. Either we're supposed to annihilate the people, and that's challenging in and of itself, but wait a second.
Convert.
What?
Offer them peace if they convert.
Right. So Barbara is suggesting you offer them peace, like you offer them an opportunity to convert to what was then Israelite religion. But then what does God want? Does God want us to live in peace with the people who are living in the land of Israel? Or does God want us to totally annihilate the indigenous population? And maybe it's other towns outside the land of Israel, if we expand our borders, that we're supposed to approach and offer peace first. So these are the challenging questions about this. So, yes, Marv.
Well, it seems to me that in Genesis, when Canaan is promised to Abraham, God says something to the effect that it won't be given to him 400 years because the sins of the Canaanites haven't yet reached their full form. And so, I mean, there's some sense that the Canaanites are being punished for their evil. I mean, it's not simply a question of them being pagans and, I mean, the decision, in other words, to give Canaan to the Israelites follows from a previous determination that they are to be expelled from the land because of their abominations, their evil.
Right.
So in some sense, it's a divine punishment that the Israelites are the instrument of.
Right. So Marv is referring to and commenting on the promise that God gave to Abraham back in the book of Genesis, which is in chapter 15, describing that Abraham's descendants won't be able to inherit the land of Israel for 400 years because of the sins of the Canaanites not being worthy of being punished until 400 years. So let me read this. This is in what's called in Hebrew Brit Bein HaBetarim, which is called the Covenant of the Pieces, because God says to Abraham, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old she-goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and young bird, he brought them all these and cut them in half. So Abraham cut all these in half. That's why it's between the pieces. As the sun was about to set, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, because his name wasn't changed yet, and a great dark dread descended upon him. God said to Abram, know well that your offspring shall be strangers in a land not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will execute judgment on the nation they shall serve, and in the end they shall go free with great wealth. Right? So God is going to punish the Egyptians, and the Israelites will go free from Egypt with great wealth. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a ripe old age, and they shall return here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Okay, so in other words, you can't inherit it now. Canaanites the Amorites haven't been totally evil yet, but by then they will have been, and they'll deserve this punishment. So, one way to answer this challenge of why the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites need to be totally annihilated is that their sin deserves that punishment. In other words, they are so evil they need to be destroyed, and God wants the Israelites to do that as they enter the land. So that further compounds the challenge. Which came first? Did God's promise to Abram come first? And that was a foreshadowing of the events here in Deuteronomy 400 years later. Or did Deuteronomy come first, and then you give the authenticity or the authority to this demand to annihilate the indigenous population by writing a story about God making a promise to Abraham that in a future generation they're going to have to annihilate. You see the backwards nature of this? If you say that the Torah is written by human beings, then you can ask the question about how the Torah was written. Was it written in the order in which we read it? Right? Genesis written first, then Exodus, then Leviticus, then Numbers, Deuteronomy. Or were parts of it written before other parts were written, and perhaps the Deuteronomy section is written before the Genesis section was written. Do you get the point then? And if that's the case, then you can ask the question, which came first? Did God's promise to Abram come first, and all of this follows as proof that God's promise is coming true? Or did this get written first and everything else get written after the fact to allow the Israelites the reason to try to annihilate the indigenous population? Okay, so this, like I said, further compounds the question and the challenge of this text. A further challenge for this text, of course, is people who read the Torah literally, whether it is Jewish people today or other religions reading the text today. If God is allowing the Israelites or commanding the Israelites to totally annihilate an indigenous population, then we're saying that God permits war and violence to be perpetrated on God's behalf. And that, to moderns, can be a very challenging and disturbing thought. So, for example, if what we're going to read from the Torah on Friday morning for the 7th day of Pesach, and this is throughout the world because the 8th day of Pesach is on Shabbat this year, is only in the diaspora outside of the land of Israel, but Israel and the whole Jewish world on the 7th day of Pesach reads the actual exodus from Egypt and culminating in the Song of the Sea. Right? So, or we might be familiar with one tune for that, Az Yashir Moshe U'Bnei Yisrael. Right? So they sang the song as they're departing, as they've just crossed over the sea, and the Egyptian soldiers have just been drowned by the water coming down on top of them. How is God described in that song? What is the human terms that are used to describe God? God is an Ish Milchama. Adonai Ish Milchama, Adonai Shemo. God is a man of war. God is his name. Adonai is a man of war. Adonai is his name. Okay? So, in other words, you have an image of God in Exodus and the Exodus story as God being a vehicle, a tool of war, or God being war itself, war personified, and that God can perpetrate violence on the people's behalf. So how do we respond to that? So one way to respond to this evil, the violence, is that we only do a partial Hallel on the last days of Passover. First 2 days of Passover, we do all of the Hallel, all the Psalms and Hallel, because we're totally rejoicing for being free from Egypt. But we shouldn't be rejoicing all the time or throughout the whole holiday, because Egyptians did have to die in order for us to be free. God killed them. And this is a rabbinic perspective on Adonai Ish Milchama, on God being a man of war, because so you omit, we are supposed to omit 2 of the Psalms, or 2 halves of Psalms of Hallel, in order to decrease our joy a little bit, to understand that Egyptians had to die in order for us to be free. And even more so, there are many conservative synagogues. That section, that Song of the Sea, is part of the preliminary service every morning throughout the Jewish year. A holiday, weekday, that is near the end of the preliminary service. And there are many conservative synagogues that omit that section from the preliminary service, because that is an image of God that those particular synagogues don't want to promote. And so in order not to promote violence as being associated with God, they omit that section from the prayer book entirely. I mean, it's not like they rip the page out. It's just saying we're going to skip now, to skip over this section onto the next section. So there's one way to deal with the violence in our tradition, is not to read this. Right? So probably I'm not sure what those synagogues do when they get to the portion of Shoftim where you have this commandment. So when you get to the point that you can cut things out of the prayer book that you have a problem with, can you then also cut things out of the Torah that you have a problem with? So that is a question. That's a valid question that many synagogues have, and the more liberal the synagogue, the more that they will cut out and pick and choose. So Reform synagogues, for example, would totally skip this, and would skip lots of sections in the prayer book which go against their perception of what God should be and what they feel they should be promoting when it comes to God. So the conservative movement is neither here nor there. In other words, not willing to totally cut everything out of the prayer book and the Torah, but at the same time to understand that one way to understand this challenge is that it's easier to say that people wrote this, in that, okay, well, so you're talking about the mindset of a human being from 3,000 years ago, where it was very common for people to behave and think in this violent kind of way. It was just the way nations waged war against nations, and that even within an Israelite religious way, we're going to wage war this way too. But for us, it's not going to be a matter of territory or any other matter of human greed as being the basis for going to war. It's a religious reason. We want to be able to promote and ensure that Israelite religion stays pure within the land of Israel. And therefore, since people wrote this, we can understand, we can explain it away easier to know by saying that people wrote this, and so it's able to understand it in that historical context. It's harder to explain it if you say that God wrote it, right? Because if God wrote this, then how do we explain that God demands violence on God's behalf? Right, and that would remain, yes.
And against all his people. Notice.
Right, these are God's people too.
Right.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And there are even medieval philosophers like Maimonides, for example, who understand that God, though. Let's back up. So, after the flood in Noah's time. Humanity started over again with Noah and his family. So Maimonides understands that everybody had the chance to be righteous at that time. So there are 7 commandments, according to the rabbis, not necessarily clear in the text of the Torah itself in chapter 9 of Genesis. There are certain commandments that God gave Noah and his descendants upon leaving the ark to behave in a moral and ethical way. But the rabbis derive 7 commandments. If all the nations of the world who are not Jewish, all they have to do is observe 7 mitzvahs. We as Jews, we have 606 more to do, but B'nai Noach, they're called, the descendants of Noah, only have to do 7. And there's this concept that there are righteous people among the children of Noah, and the righteous of the children of Noah have a share in the world to come, just like Jewish people do. So among them is, among these 7 laws is murder, not eating a limb from, you can't catch an animal, pull off its limb and eat it. So, yeah, disgusting face, but yes, disgusting. But those are 2 of this.
You can kill the animal.
You can go hunting the animal, right, but you just don't catch it and start pulling it apart alive. You have to kill it, yes, yes. And you can't eat the blood of the animal, whatever. So there's 7 laws there, that's all they have to do. But there's nothing about monotheism in the 7 laws. It's about how to behave in a moral, ethical way, nothing about how to believe in God. So Maimonides understands that what happened to the descendants of Noah is that they strayed from a possible monotheism, but they have the right to do that, and God allows it, which is a radical statement, that because not all the rabbis agreed with Maimonides' opinion. Some were very anti-pagan and anti-idolaters, and had no those who were certainly among those persecuted by the Romans who were idolaters, didn't have such a positive feeling towards them. But Maimonides, living in a different era under Islam, is able to. Another thought is coming into my head about that, just to say that. So he was able, because he's 1,000 years after. About 600 years after the Talmud, he's able to have a different approach to non-Jews and to idolaters, and that you can see also the evolution of thought to the other, and the treatment of the other all depends upon the society in which you're living. Right? So if you're living in a monotheistic society, which Islam is, you have a better, and because the Jews were treated better in the area in which Maimonides was living. You have an opportunity to treat the non-Jew or look at the non-Jew in a better light. If you're rabbis in the time of the Romans being persecuted by the Romans, it would be natural then to not see the non-Jew in a good light. But all of this, in response to this Cherem idea, is all dependent upon how we understand this text being written. Is a human being writing this, or is God writing this? And that would then help us answer the challenge. Marv.
Well, in accounts of battles in the ancient Near East, you frequently have descriptions where the victor says that he annihilated the enemy.
Right.
And slaughtered them and this and that. And it's just not true. Like, for example, the son of Ramses II
right.
Had a battle with the Israelites. And there's this famous inscription,
right.
the first mention of ancient Israel, and it says, Israel's seed is no more.
Right.
Israel is annihilated.
Right.
Obviously premature.
Right.
Given that, we're still here.
Right.
But, I mean, that was the kind of language they used, the same way that, the coach of some basketball team, they say, go out there and annihilate.
Right, right.
And it very well could be that that's all that is, because we know that the Canaanites were not annihilated, that the land was full of Canaanites.
That, yes.
After this conquest.
Right. So again, Marv is pointing out that this could also understanding that from being written in human language, that it's common for human beings to exaggerate, and that if you're going to motivate people to act, you want to it's common to exaggerate in order to motivate them in that. So by saying totally annihilate these people, it's to motivate the Israelites to get the job done. But it also highlights that many scholars believe that Deuteronomy is the last book of the Torah to have been written chronologically, and that it was written more closer to the time of the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem. So if that's the case, then that helps us understand the context of the book of the Torah too, and why these commandments are given in this particular way. What I mean by that is, here, the historical context in the year 586 BCE is that the Babylonians are about to conquer the southern kingdom of Israel. Israel is divided into a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. The northern kingdom had been exiled almost 200 years before by the Assyrians. Southern kingdom, what is basically the tribe of Judah, from about Jerusalem south, a little bit north of Jerusalem and all the way south, is what Babylonia is about to conquer, and the temple in Jerusalem. So if you're living in Judah and you're about to be conquered by the Babylonians, you're going to be asking, why is this happening? And if you witness the temple being destroyed, you're going to be asking, why is God letting God's house be destroyed? Okay? So the books of the Bible that were written around that time, especially Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, and some of the other minor prophets as well, talk about religious reasons as to why this is happening. And the main religious reason is that the Israelites totally disregarded the Torah, and it's because of their disregard for the Torah and their adoption of Canaanite pagan ways that God needed to destroy them. So you have, in the Torah, we're told not to follow the ways of the Canaanites. The people are following the ways of the Canaanites, hence the temple's being destroyed. So could that be why the Torah is being written in this way? Where had we only gotten rid of the Amorites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, then maybe the temple wouldn't be destroyed now. So this could be a current text to the time in which the temple was about to be destroyed by the Babylonians. So if that's the case, then it's not just an exaggeration, but it's also reality. Right? One person's or a group of people's understanding, if only we had listened to God, then we could have done this. So this must be what God wanted us to have done, and we didn't do it. And from Joshua to the books of the Judges, 2 books of Samuel, 2 books of Kings, it's all about the Israelites not completing the task. They go to battle. Joshua totally destroys the city of Jericho, totally destroys the city of Ai, and then stops totally destroying other towns in Israel as the Israelites are settling. Why did he stop? That's a question for scholars, but he only did the Cherem on Jericho and Ai and stopped doing it from then on. And the rest of the judges didn't do it. Saul and David and Solomon didn't do it. The Philistines were still around. Other Canaanite towns were still around. And talking about here, we're not supposed to be influenced by their ways. And then the rest of the Bible talks about how we were influenced by their ways. And we see, according to the Bible, the temple being destroyed because we neglected God. So.
All right, I'm going to get back to the prophecy in Genesis.
Yes.
And it's really, I mean, I also, while I was doing taxes, I was watching the History Channel. They were doing archaeology in the Middle East.
Yes.
And
You're just wondering whether the taxes. Right. Yeah. That's kind of hard to work on tax, focus on the numbers, and still be paying attention to history.
He's very good. Archaeologists found Devarim separately.
Yes.
And I don't know how true it is, but they show it.
Right, that's the theory, that Devarim, Deuteronomy is done.
Interpretation where they all found together.
Right. So we just read so Saul is asking the question about Deuteronomy and the authorship of Deuteronomy and the theory that Deuteronomy was found later than the rest of the Torah. So how do the rabbis understand this? So we just read this in the Haftarah this past weekend on Passover about the king Josiah. The priests had found this book, in this scroll in the temple, which described the mitzvot, and including Passover. Josiah and the priests were motivated to follow this text. And because of that, scholars think that that's possibly the book of Deuteronomy was so-called found or was written at that time in order to motivate people to return to God. There are stylistic differences in the Hebrew between Deuteronomy and the rest of the Torah. You have, for example, the Ten Commandments. Again, if the whole thing is literal from God to Moses at Mount Sinai, then the version of the Ten Commandments that we read in Exodus should be exactly the same as the version of the Ten Commandments that we read in Deuteronomy, and they're not. Okay, some words are different. Namely, the observance of Shabbat. So in Exodus, it's Shamor, and in Deuteronomy, it's Zachor. Or it could be vice versa. It's late and I don't remember, but one place it's Shamor and one place it's Zachor. Essentially, it means the same thing. Remember, observe. Okay, Zachor, remember, Shamor, observe, keep. Okay, so how do you understand then that if it's all from God, why would God give two different versions of the Ten Commandments to Moses at Mount Sinai? So we sing a song every Friday night called Lecha Dodi, and the first stanza says, Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur echad, which means Shamor, right, keep Shabbat. Zachor, remember Shabbat. The word Shamor, the word Zachor, were spoken by God in one utterance. So people can't say two words at the exact same time. Right? Try saying two words at the exact same time. You can't do it. You can play 2 different notes or 10 different notes at the same time on a piano, but you can't speak two different words at the same time at once. But only God can do that. So that's how the rabbis answer that God gave them both to Moses and Mount Sinai at the exact same time. Or you could say, well, Dibra Torah Bilshon B'nei Adam. The Torah was spoken in the language of human beings. If Moses is summarizing the Torah at that point to the people of Israel, he's summarizing the Ten Commandments as well to the people. And if he's just summarizing, then it's okay if it's a little bit different, because essentially it's the same thing. Keep Shabbat, keep, remember, observe. It's all basically synonyms of the same word, so that's okay. And if you're adding a couple more people who have to refrain from work, because a couple more animals are listed in Deuteronomy that refrain from work, and a couple more slaves are listed, categories of slaves are listed in Deuteronomy, but also the reason for observing Shabbat's different. In Exodus, the reason is we're supposed to remember creation. In Deuteronomy, the reason is we're supposed to remember the Exodus from Egypt. Well, that's a significant difference too. So anyway, so the idea is then that is another challenging text, is the difference between the Ten Commandments. It all is about authorship. And if we are, like I am, if we're willing to say that the Torah is a human document, ancient nonetheless, but human, reflecting, and it is a sacred document because it is held in sanctity and holiness by the Jewish people, and has been, we know for sure that the Torah has been around for 2,000 years. We know that for sure because of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which have been carbon dated to be over 2,000 years old. And the Torah, as we have it here, is found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So we know at least it is 2,000 years old. So, and therefore reflects a tradition from before that. So is it 3,000 years old? We don't know for sure, but I think an amulet that had the priestly blessing was found in the precincts of the temple. All the garbage from the digging that the Muslim religious authority is doing on the top of the Temple Mount. They've been digging there and throwing that dirt over the side of the Temple Mount as they've been expanding the mosques and whatnot. So Israeli archaeologists have gone through that mound of dirt and found some pretty precious ancient stuff that goes back to the first temple. And I think one of the things that they found is the priestly blessing, which is older than 2,000 years. And I think it's from the time of the first temple. So if that's from there, that's a text that's in our Torah, in the book of Numbers. You could, by extension, say that a lot more of the Torah was 3,000 or 2,500 years old. So, but we don't know the origin of it. Did God really write this? And so for me, it makes more sense to me, and it doesn't take away from the sanctity of the text, to say that this is a human document, a human response to some awesome, and I mean that in the religious sense, not in the teenager slang sense, some awesome event happened at some point to prompt people to respond to it and write this document as a way to respond to that sense of God and make God present in our lives. And I think that even though this is a human document, it is still sacred, it is still holy, and still to be treated as such, but knowing that it is a human document, it helps us understand these so-called challenges in the text and helps us better interpret them and understand them and explain them away in a way that makes it still be a relevant text to us. And we don't have to throw it away. We don't have to say, well, I can't believe in God if this is God, if this is what God wants, because we don't have to say that God wrote this. This is a people 3,000 years ago in a particular religious mindset, and our religious mindset has evolved over time. And we know that the rabbis have reinterpreted the concept of Cherem today to make it not annihilating the indigenous population, but a method of excommunicating someone from the community. So the rabbis have interpreted and continue to interpret the text and to explain things and make it relevant for their times. So too do we have the right to continue to interpret and make the text relevant for our lives today as well. Any other questions? Yes, Julian.
So, the modern Hiram
Yes.
and the excommunication, I mean, to think of a group of rabbis or whatever saying, well, then you can't come to shul anymore.
Right. Well, so Julian's asking about Cherem excommunicating. The one valid way to do this, and a valid excuse to do such a Cherem, is in very Orthodox communities. If a husband refuses to give his wife a get, there is an opportunity that some synagogues do to keep that person from receiving any honors in shul, participate in shul, and even keep them from coming to shul. But even that doesn't work because, let's say, even here in the Washington area, there's been a case a couple of years ago, somebody in Silver Spring who was under such a, not necessarily a cherem, but almost to that point, that don't associate with this person. And they can even say, don't do business with this person. If he runs a business, don't go to his business, that kind of thing. But even that doesn't work so much because a person can move. They can go to Potomac. It's a matter of all the rabbis needing to be on the same on board together to say, okay, if a rabbi in Kent Mill is going to say that this person should be under such a ban, I'm going to keep that ban here too, so to ensure that this person is persona non grata totally in this area. And then, because the person wants to have custody of the children, they're not going to move to some other area because they want to have contact with the family. So theoretically, a person under such a ban could just move to Baltimore or move to Philadelphia, move someplace else. And no other rabbi is under has to follow that particular ban because there's not one Orthodox religious authority that every Orthodox rabbi believes in and follows. So such a ban doesn't really work anymore in the community today. So I can see the relevance of having such a ban for such a case in trying to get someone to give their wife a get. But for some other religious reason, because someone, theoretically, if someone doesn't believe in God, professes to be an atheist, they can be put under cherem. But that really doesn't happen anymore. Right? So, yes, Mark.
I was going to say that we see the Islamic militants today.
Right.
We think of Boko Haram, and Haram is Cherem, actually.
Right.
It's a Semitic word.
Right.
So, and so they're actually following the old idea of Cherem.
That's right.
So, from the point of view of being Jewish and sort of having these overlays
yes.
and redefinitions over time,
right.
How does that theologically make you think about a sister religion, which in some respects is stuck in a period piece, which is not all that different from 3,000 years ago?
Right. So Mark is asking about just looking at radical militant Islam and Boko Haram in Nigeria, and Haram being a cognate from Arabic of the same word in Hebrew, cherem. How does that make us think? So rather than talk about that, why don't we just talk about ultra-Orthodoxy? It's the same thing. Every religion has its fundamentalists, and the more literal one is in regarding the text of the Bible itself, the more fundamentalist one is going to be. So, and therefore, the more literally you read the text, the less able you are to interpret new meaning in the text. Because the so-called concept of Torah true Judaism is this idea of getting back to the so-called right way and true way of reading the text. But of course, that is a misnomer because it's Torah true based on the ultra-Orthodox rabbinic perspective. Well, what is Torah true? It's not Torah. Torah true Jews today are the Karaites. They are the closest to being Torah true because they're following their religious belief based on only what the Torah says. Ultra-Orthodoxy today follows Torah and the Mishnah and the Talmud, which is not Torah, but it's the oral Torah as they understand it. So it's all a matter of how willing we are to interpret the text and derive new meaning. And I argue, as a conservative Jew, that the rabbis set up the system for us today by having majority and minority opinions maintained in the text of the Mishnah and the Talmud itself. If the rabbis wanted us to have a fundamentalist approach to the text, they would have only had one opinion quoted in the text to be followed. By quoting the minority and giving equal weight to the minority opinion and recording it for posterity, teaches me as a conservative rabbi and teaches the conservative movement that that's the nature of how Judaism is supposed to naturally evolve. We are supposed to constantly question and interpret Jewish law and derive new meaning from it. There are certain things that will never change because there are no reasons given them for the Torah. So there's no way that we're ever going to be able to eat pork. Okay, and there's no moral or ethical reason to want to eat pork. So that's not going to change. But there's certain other ethical principles, like the Cherem idea that was our topic today, that can be argued that maybe we shouldn't be doing this and we shouldn't have this approach when it comes to war that the state of Israel wages today. Right? Should in the state of Israel, when it wages war against its enemy, should it be in a Cherem kind of way? Certainly, there would be precedent for that to allow the IDF to act in this way. But certainly, that's not the way the IDF acts. And so, how is the Israeli army allowed not to follow the Torah? Right? So it's all a matter of interpretation and evolution of the text, and that is the nature of Judaism. And that's a challenge itself as well. But the beauty of this class is that we always leave with more questions than we started with, and that's the way it's supposed to be. And I want us to get us thinking about the text itself, not to take the Torah and the text of the Torah for granted, to think about it and to know that we have the right to ask questions about it. We don't have the right to throw it away and omit sections that are problematic. What we do have the right to do is ask questions about it and understand that we aren't the only ones to have questions about it. The rabbis centuries ago had questions about it too. Okay. Have a good night, everybody, and Chag Sameach.